Thank you very much. Very excited to have the opportunity to discuss talent with you all today. We know you guys have had some incredible programming throughout CSS. We're a bit biased, but we'd argue the people you hire is going to have as big of an impact on whether or not you guys are successful as anything else. So talent is a broad topic. We understand you guys are all at different points along the journey. And with that said, we do still want to try to give some tangible advice and some key things that you guys should all be thinking about at this early stage. Quick intros on our side, as Jeff just mentioned. I'm Craig Naylor. I'm the head of talent for A16Z Crypto, and also be joined by Mehdi Hasan, who leads executive talent here for A16Z Crypto. Quick look at our agenda, what we're going to be covering throughout the session today. We've broken this up into three different areas. First being around defining your needs, the pre-work, what needs to happen before you actually start recruiting, establishing your talent brand, creating a hiring plan, developing an interview framework. Next, we'll dive into building a pipeline. So once you define your needs and what you're trying to build, how do you actually go about recruiting and building a pipeline? And then lastly, focusing on closing the candidate. All of this means nothing if you don't actually get the candidate to accept an offer at the end of the process. So you've identified someone great. How do we actually get them across the finish line? So we'll spend some time on that. Then lastly, we'll leave some time for Q&A. Again, understanding you guys are all at different points along the journey, so happy to answer any particular questions you might have. Cool. So first, in terms of defining your needs and your overall talent philosophy, there's a lot of things when thinking about what makes a business successful. Am I going after the right market? Do I have the right product? Do I have the right vision? And ultimately, do I have the right people and team to execute on these things? A great idea is going to fail if you don't have the right people working on it. And with that said, it's that much more critical that you really define what your needs are, what it is that you're looking for, and how all of these puzzle pieces should fit together. So let's dive in. Before we really get into defining what your needs are, let's first start with defining your talent brand as part of your overall talent philosophy. So let's think back a couple of weeks ago. Again, Mehdi and I were supposed to be here a few weeks ago, but think back to the sessions we had on culture from Jeannie, Daisy, and Key. As Jeannie mentioned a few weeks back, culture can be a major competitive advantage for you when it comes to attracting and retaining top talent. Think of companies you've worked at before, or even just other interviews you've done. How did the culture show itself throughout that process? How did it influence your decision as to whether or not you're going to join the company, or just your overall impression that was left afterwards? People want to be inspired by their place of work, and you as the founder are critical in establishing that from the very beginning, from day one. It's something you're going to be asked about by every single candidate along the process. And again, as we touched on a few weeks ago, it's so important that you really lean into your culture, you own it, you have it living and breathing throughout your organization. And the same should be said for the hiring process. Culture is definitely something you want to have be part of the interview process. And again, this is going to be something you need to convey as part of your talent brand as well. Mehdi will touch on that in a little bit in terms of how we can actually weave culture into the interview process, but more on that in a little bit. But like we said a few weeks back, if you're not intentional about culture, it's likely not going to be conveyed well, and certainly applies throughout your interview processes as well. Then with regards to your pitch, so again, this is a pretty basic part of recruiting, but how are you getting people excited about what it is that you're doing and the product that you're building? Some people think of this as an elevator pitch, but really all we're looking for is just a clear, crisp, concise way of describing what you're building and why people should be excited about it. It can be as simple as just putting together a quick blurb. And again, having some sort of a way to articulate this, both written as well as verbal, and training folks on your team to follow something similar there. And again, creating materials on this, like share these resources with your team. You want to make sure that there's a consistent message being conveyed across everyone. You don't want candidates to be confused because they had 3 or 4 different conversations where the vision wasn't aligned in terms of what they were describing and what you guys are trying to achieve. Everyone that is on the founding team is part of your recruiting team as well, and should be able to articulate the vision just as well as you can. Then lastly, we'll focus on external content here. When somebody Googles your company, what do they see? What are the things that you want them to know about you when you don't really have a conversation or a chance to explain? Your website, your careers page, your social media presence. These are all opportunities to let prospective candidates know what you guys are all about. We've started to see lots of companies put together Notion pages. Several of our CSS cohort has done that as well. And with this, you can highlight things like your benefits, the roles that are open, the company culture, your mission statement, the vision, explain more about the product. Again, just things that you want the external world to know about you when you don't have a chance to explain it via conversation. This is going to set the foundation for everything that you do externally as you start to build your team and start to tap the market and try to tell your story more effectively than really any DM or email that you could write to somebody. This external content is going to be what gives people the most context. So with that said, I'm going to bring Mehdi up on the stage now to talk through creating an actual hiring plan. And once it is actually time to set out to hire, how do you craft that proper plan? How do you craft an org chart, interview framework, all while maintaining a high talent bar? So again, Mehdi will come up to talk through that.
Thank you so much, Craig. Good to be here with all of you. So creating a hiring plan, I think one of the first things to consider in creating a hiring plan is figuring out your org design. To Jeannie's analogy a few weeks back, you have your foundation set, your company culture. Think of this as like the layout of the house. How many bedrooms am I going to have? Where's the kitchen going to be? How many bathrooms? How am I going to set up this thing? And in terms of actually building your company, I would look at this as like my product team, my marketing team, my operations team. Is engineering going to be in product? Is product going to be in engineering? And to Ryan's talk yesterday, this will be fluid. You are going to make changes. You may remodel every now and then, but I think starting off with this is a good way to set yourself up for success in beginning to craft through these things. Another thing to think through in terms of your org design is ratios of hiring, getting a plan up front. Like if I hire 5 to 7 engineers, do I need an engineering manager or a product person to complement them or a marketing person or a designer? All these things up front, having a blueprint that you can go off of just helps you move in the right direction as you begin to scale your company. Next is headcount planning. This would be a double click on your org design. So like you have your product organization, your engineering organization, but how many people do I actually need in order to deliver on some of these milestones that I'm going to be executing on as I scale my company? Hopefully at this point you have your product roadmap and the timelines and the features and all these things outlined for the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months. But a common mistake I think early stage founders make is knowing exactly what I need to hire to execute on this. So like 3 back-end engineers, 2 front-end engineers. If you look back at like 2021, 2022, I think people didn't have that discipline or a plan that they stuck to, and were just hiring like crazy, bringing in all these different people, and you can see a lot of changes had to be made, and I think it's because they got stuck in FOMO or comparing themselves with other competitors. When you have a headcount plan in place, I think it helps you stay disciplined and sticking to what you actually need to build your company. And then try to plan for different scenarios that may come up. If I get this many users for my product, or I get this much market revenue, or if the market conditions change, you can have different scenarios that you can reference and look at, just so you're not caught off guard and emotionally making changes, again, based on things that are out of your control. Role prioritization is really trying to figure out exactly which order you should be hiring. You're not always going to be able to do this. You may find a really strong candidate that you just need to get now, and timing just doesn't work out in the way you want to. But to the best that you can in terms of discipline on this, I think it's important to try and structure the timing of each hire. An example from a former company I used to work at, we were building out our sales organization. We had headcount for 4 people, a head of sales, and then 3 SDRs specific to each vertical. We ended up hiring the 3 SDRs first, and that seemed great at the moment, but they were building in the wrong direction. When the head of sales had come on, quickly found out that this wasn't the right type of people that they wanted for their organization, and it just wasn't the right market that they should be looking at. So we had to unwind, let them go, and rebuild again. And as Ryan mentioned yesterday, it's really hard to do this when you move in the direction. So if you can, try to stay disciplined and hire in the right order and prioritize as much as possible. Something that we built here internally at A16Z is called the mock framework. This is really an internal job description that you can reference in helping put together and thinking about what it is you're building. It's mission, outcomes, and competencies. Think of the mission as the qualification of the requisition. Why am I hiring this person? Do I actually need them? And you may find you may not need them, and so it's a good exercise to do in determining, should I hire this person? Can I get a part-time person, a contractor, etc. I would look at the outcomes as the specific accomplishments that you want this person to do, being specific, trying to articulate what you expect this person to do in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, also helps you begin to think about your interview or assessment. And then competencies is the last thing, how you expect the person to operate against the outcomes, what is their background, what is their skill set and specific experience. And again, another good thing to use when you put together your interview framework and focus areas. And then taking the mock framework and putting together an external job description that you would put on your careers page or share externally with candidates as you begin to do outreach. So let's go over a sample job description. We picked a software engineering role that we used to hire here at A16Z on the crypto team. As you can see, one of the first things is a company summary. This should engage the audience. This should be able to explain clearly what it is your company's building, what is your product idea, and within 10 seconds or less, get them captivated to want to read further. Next is your role overview. This is really the mission from the mock framework. In story form, exactly what you expect the person should be doing in this role. The responsibilities, these are the outcomes, so what you expect the person to do in list form, things that they should be looking at in terms of evaluating themselves and if they're interested in this type of work. And then last is the qualifications. This would be the competencies, the specific things in their background and skill set and experience. These should be fairly measurable and objective. And then culture. Either putting this in your job description or somewhere on your page, I think, is really important. To Jeannie and Craig's points on culture, and even Ryan yesterday, it's something really important. It can help candidates either self-select in or even self-select out, depending on whether they align with what you're building. And I know this may seem frustrating or something that could be on the downside of getting candidates engaged in the early stages, but in the long run of building your company, I think finding people that align with your culture will go a long way. And then jumping into interviewer framework. So you have your mock set up, your job descriptions, and now you're ready to start assessing candidates. This is something really important that you want to really take your time in putting together. This is how you maintain and establish a really high bar for assessing candidates. And so one of the first things to think about is your assessment criteria. This is really like the focus areas that you're going to be giving to each person that will be interviewing for you, making sure that everybody is encompassing all the things that matter in hiring for this role, so that I think it's common for early stages or not thinking through too much about this or having a plan in place for everybody to ask the same question to the candidate. You end up hiring them because everyone asked that one question. They were fantastic at that. You find quickly within 30 days, no one asked them about the other 4 parts of the job, and so now you have this big gap. So making sure you're disciplined and sticking to this. And in the spirit of maintaining a high bar, I think it's really important to stick to this. You're going to find yourself talking to candidates and getting really excited about something that they've done, but then missing all these other things. Having your assessment criteria put in place that you can reference is really important to maintaining a really high bar along the way. Interview calibration and training, taking time to make sure everybody understands that's helping you assess candidates, what it is exactly you're looking for, what is the bar, what's important to you culturally as a company, so that there's no questions left unanswered. No one's going into this blind, not really sure what it is exactly that you're looking for. Now, you may find that there's people on your team or even yourselves have never actually interviewed people before, and you don't know how do I assess candidates. There are third-party firms that you can work with, bring on board to help you with this. They can go over interviewer best practices, how to even write feedback, etiquette for conducting a positive experience for candidates, because you want to make sure that they're all feeling like you know what you're doing and you're set up for success to do that, and then how to deep dive into a candidate and probe on specific areas, whether concerns or things that are really critical for the role. Or another option would be to bring on an advisor into your company, someone who's done this at scale. Like if you're hiring engineers, bringing on a former CTO or a current CTO that has a lot of experience in doing this and helping you set that up within your company. At all points of your interview process, you should be meeting every candidate, whether it's in person via Zoom. But I think there may be situations where it's better to do a take-home assignment or some sort of project, like a coding assessment, whatever it is, depending on the role. Up here we have 2 examples. One is a standard hiring flow. Another one is one with a take-home assignment. Just quickly, a couple trade-offs on each one. With the standard hiring flow, you do spend a little bit more time assessing candidates, your own, but could be a more positive candidate experience. With a take-home assignment, you really want to make sure you're setting them up to continue the whole process. A lot of candidates might drop off and not do this, so making sure you're spending your initial call, really getting them into that process and making sure they're going to follow through. I think something important through all this is thinking through the candidate experience and being really thoughtful on, like, if I was going through this process myself, would I actually stick with this? And so asking advisors, mentors, third-party people to evaluate your process, and even during the interview process, like, don't hesitate to make changes if you need to. If you're finding the data or feedback from candidates as this process was bad or whatnot, making sure you're tracking all that and making adjustments as needed. Cool, so you're probably wondering, I have all this stuff put together, I have my frameworks, I have my interview criteria, I have my job descriptions, how do I actually go and find candidates? Craig is going to jump into that a little bit here.
Thank you. So building a pipeline. Before we dive into the true recruiting and sourcing side of talent acquisition, tying back to the building a house example, let's first focus on the foundation underneath it all, which is recruiting operations. So on the recruiting ops side, there's really just two things I want to convey around this. It's really important that you develop some sort of a method for tracking and documenting all of your hiring activity. The purpose of this is somewhat twofold. First, just to ensure that you're holding yourself and the hiring team accountable to the assessment framework and all of the things that Mehdi just talked through. If you're not documenting feedback, if you're not documenting your hiring processes, it's going to be really hard to enforce that amongst your interviewing team. Things like having detailed scorecards, organized interview questions. It's also going to ensure a fair, consistent evaluation is done and really help you when it's time to make those difficult hiring decisions and when it's actually time to pull the trigger. The second part of this is to ensure basically just that you're not dropping the ball on any candidates. You guys are all founders. You have 10,000 things you could be doing at any given moment. And as a result, if you're not diligent about tracking and following up with candidates, you're going to have things slip through the cracks. Inevitably, somebody that you reached out to responded, said, now's not a good time, hit me up again in 3 or 4 months. If you don't have some sort of a documented way and process of following up with these things, you're going to forget about folks. And as Mehdi just alluded to, candidate experience is such a critical part of the overall hiring process. You'd hate to lose out on a great candidate because you took 2 weeks to get back to them and they lost interest in the meantime. It's also going to be critical in ensuring that you have all the data that you need for future hires. Your organization is going to change over time. Maybe you meet somebody today that's not the right fit now, but 6 months from now, 12 months from now, as your organization matures or maybe new roles open, they could be the right fit then. It'd be very, very helpful to have all these things to look back on later down the road. So again, build the infrastructure for this sooner rather than later. You'll certainly thank yourself down the road. Now, as far as what the tools and resources are around this, likely you won't need to invest too much in this area until you have a little bit more volume with the level of hiring that you're doing, or once you've hired an internal talent team. And we've got applicant tracking systems listed here, but again, likely this isn't going to be needed until you have internal talent support. In the meantime, you guys can get by on G Suite. Have a simple Google Sheet tracking all of your candidates, some sort of a scorecard template that you build into a Google Doc. And of course, leverage a calendar tool as well. Having some sort of a call to action where people can book in time on your calendar, avoiding that back and forth. Again, it's just going to make the entire process more efficient. But from a tooling perspective, there's really not much else that you need beyond these things. There's a lot of public channels that we can source and find talent in. And so that's what we're going to touch on next. So again, you guys are all founders. I realize you're busy and you have a million things to be doing, but you're also recruiters at this early stage. And so we'll touch on some of the basics here around sourcing and actually building a pipeline. First and foremost, I think the fastest way and really the easiest way to get going in terms of building out your team is to leverage your existing network and the network of those folks who are working for you. There's all kinds of statistics you can point to around how much more likely it is for a referred candidate to land a job versus a cold one. Again, you want to lean on your founding team, investors, mentors, advisors, friends, people who typically great talent knows other great talent. You want to make sure that you're doing what you can to expand your message. And again, tying it back to the pitch materials and some of the external content we talked about earlier, make it easy for these people. Again, if you're asking folks to refer people to you or you're trying to pick apart their networks, give them the ammunition that they need to describe your opportunity, give them that quick elevator pitch and a way that they can really talk through things. I would also say frequently ask people. Don't be afraid to ask the same person twice, as a couple of months have gone by. You'd be surprised how many times I've seen candidates get referred in, and you just want to say to the person, why didn't you give this to me 6 months ago? The reality is things just change. People, they go through different parts. Maybe somebody wasn't available then, so they weren't top of mind, and now they are. It's never too often to be asking for these types of things, and really making sure that hiring is staying top of mind for everybody that's involved with your organization. And then I'd encourage you to think outside the box on this too. It's not just your network, but how do you tap into your network's network? Is there a professor that you were really close with in college that might know other people in a similar area that you could get to know further there or kind of build off of their network? Are there other people within other clubs or blockchain clubs that you were a part of before? Can you now take a more active role as a company, being more vocal in these types of settings and other things? You're going to get to a point where you have tapped your network or you have tapped all of the resources that are available to you, and you'll actually want to do some external sourcing as well. And again, I know a lot of you guys are starting to post jobs, and you have careers pages and things, and likely you will get some candidates flowing through this way, but the reality is conversion rates tend to be very low for inbound applications. Now, you can do things to help with that, make sure, again, that these are posted in areas where your talent is living, but you are going to have to find some time where you actually need to go hunt and find the right talent for you. And so just to briefly touch on the sourcing and candidate outreach side, I think you first want to start with mapping the market. Again, I don't think many of you will be spending hours upon hours sending thousands of LinkedIn emails, but there is going to be a time where it makes sense for you guys to roll up your sleeves and do some strategic sourcing. Again, getting into the market mapping side of this, like what are your competitors doing? Where's the talent that you're at? Where are people that are currently working on the things that you're working on? Where are they living? Where are they active? LinkedIn is certainly still our most common channel in terms of finding talent, but increasingly we're seeing more uncommon ways of finding folks, or at least in comparison to a lot of web2 recruiting. It's very common to source people from Twitter, from Telegram groups, from Discord groups. And I think there's a very heavy IRL component to web3 as well. A lot of events and conferences, which are really good recruiting opportunities for you as well. So when you go to these events, be active at them. Attend happy hours, be social, have conversations, and again, always be asking folks for referrals if you have a good conversation with somebody, even if it's not the right fit for them. So just to briefly touch on messaging for a quick second, to reference Piers' chat from yesterday, we're now at that dreaded outreach part of talent acquisition. And you found a candidate that looks perfect. How do we actually go about engaging them, and how do we craft a message? I've broken this up into a couple of different areas. First we'll touch on content, and there's not a perfect science to this, but generally speaking, I've found a few things to be more fruitful than others. First, just don't overthink it. A simple, concise message with just enough detail to get them wanting to know more is really all you're looking to do here. You don't have to write an essay about why this is the greatest opportunity that's ever going to present itself to that person. Nobody wants to read that. Again, it's just enough to get them hooked. And then you'll take it from there. I'd encourage you to show some personalization as well. Show them you're not a robot. If there's something in their background that is really exciting to you and is the primary reason that you're engaging them and reaching out, mention that. It'll get them excited and, again, feel a little bit more personalized to them. Including hyperlinks, let the opportunity sell itself. Again, you don't want to have this big 5, 10 paragraph long email. Give them the opportunity to self-service and find out information on their own. Again, tying it back to a lot of the talent brand and external content that we talked about earlier, this is where this is going to be playing a key role throughout the entire process. And then lastly, experiment. Especially when you're recruiting in bulk or at higher numbers, A/B test different messages. The same message isn't going to land the same with every single candidate. Make some about the product. Make some about the industry or the problem that you're trying to solve. Maybe some more about the team that you've built or the funding that you've received. There's all kinds of different areas that you could craft a message around, and all these things can be measured. So again, making sure that you're experimenting throughout the process with the content that you're writing. And then as far as cadence goes, I think the key thing I wanted to note here is it's okay to hit up the same person twice or 3 times over a scheduled period of time. We all know, we've all received emails at times where we were very busy or heads down on a project and we just don't get back to it. And then you think about it, a month or 2 later. A lot of times just sending that follow-up email of, hey, not sure if you saw my first note, just wanted to bump this back to the top of your inbox. You'd be surprised at how much success recruiting teams find in that. And very often, your hires are being made from not the first message that you sent to folks, but after persistent follow-up. I would also say experiment on that side as well. Again, the time of day that you're sending messages, the number of messages that you're sending, the time in between each of these messages, all of these things can matter. Again, they're all able to be measured as well. So again, if you're recruiting at bulk, these are things that typically will happen as you have an internal recruiting team, as you start going at a higher scale, but all of these things can be measured. And if there's difference in conversion rates of even just a few percentage points, it can send you a tremendous amount of time throughout the hiring process. And then re-engaging. Timing's not always going to work out for folks. If somebody gets back to you and says, I want to finish the project that I'm on, hit me up again in 6 months, that's totally fine. But keep that person engaged along the way. If in the meantime you guys have had a new feature launch, or you've launched the product, or closed another round of fundraising, or brought on a key team member, you can shoot this person just quick little notes to keep them informed and make sure that you're staying top of mind. Again, the timeline that they gave you of 6 months, maybe that goes down to 3, maybe it goes down to 4. But again, you're just wanting to make sure that you're staying top of mind for all these folks. Then just a quick look at a sample message here. Again, I'm not going to read through this, but I really just want to highlight Again, a quick introduction. My name is Craig. I'm the founder of this company. Linking into our Notion page, linking into a call to action at the end here. Feel free to grab some time on my calendar if you're down for a chat. We've got our white paper linked at the bottom. We've got our blog linked at the bottom. These all little things, but again, it's a relatively short note. And then look at the follow-up. Again, just wanted to bump this to the top of your inbox. Let me know if you're open for a quick chat. We really don't have to overthink it. Then again, I mentioned you guys are all founders. You guys can't be spending all of your time recruiting and sourcing and trying to build pipelines. So there is going to come a point where you want to leverage external resources, whether it's agencies or other methods of building pipeline. I'm going to hand it back to Mehdi here to talk through some of the options for additional resources.
So I want to talk about a couple options in the form of agencies that you all can consider and dive a little deep on each one so you have understanding of how they work. One is called an RPO, Recruiting Process Outsourcing. This is essentially where you bring a whole talent team in on a temporary basis. It's an embedded talent team. They'll have email aliases within your company, pretty much a full-on talent organization from recruiting, coordination, interviewing, offers, all that, but you can turn them on and off as needed. So you don't have to commit to hiring a full talent organization, but could be good for like a sprint of hires that you need to make in a short period of time. Next is retained search. This you'd probably want to use when you're hiring an executive or someone really like rare or a high seasoned person. Most exec search firms operate in this type of model. The thing about this is you're paying a fee up front. You're basically retaining the agency, and the fees can be anywhere from $75,000 upwards to $130,000, minus the difference of the 1/3 of a year's cash compensation. So again, it's really expensive. Be thoughtful when interviewing retained search firms, just because you want to make sure you're finding the one that has the network for the type of candidate that you're hiring, and also can compatibly work well with you, because again, you're spending a lot of money. It's a big investment, and most exec search firms will operate in this manner. Contingent search is probably the option that's going to work best for early stage founders. This is where you only pay if you get the hire. The ranges for these fees are anywhere between 15 to 30% of a first year cash compensation. You can always negotiate on this, but keep in mind, just because the rate is lower doesn't mean you're getting a good deal. A lot of these agencies do work on commission purely, and so in their mind, if the fee is lower, they may not spend as much time on that one versus another client that does have a higher fee. So again, case-by-case basis, you want to look into this. And then if you're doing volume hiring, you could probably negotiate with them. So like the first 1 through 5 hires might be at this percentage. The hires 5 through 10 would be at a lower percentage. So again, always ask and see if you can negotiate this down. And then you're probably wondering, at what point do I get a full-time resource to bring in-house to run my talent function for me? I think a general rule of thumb is if you're hiring 10 or more for more than 2 years in a row or more than a year in a row, it's probably more cost-effective to bring someone on full-time into your team. And another benefit of doing that is you actually start to invest in your talent brand long-term. When you're using some of these agencies or short-term resources, you're going to get a different perspective and different approach every time, and no one's actually investing in building this out. So hiring a full-time person when you're ready could be good for that long-term vision. Now, none of this matters if you can't close the candidate, so Craig's going to jump into some best practices there.
All this work really means nothing if you don't close the candidate. There's a lot of work that goes into this, but every interaction that you have with the candidate is ultimately going to influence whether or not they accept or decline your offer and ultimately join the company. So to touch on closing strategy, I think the first thing we want to touch on is really just understanding your candidate's motivations and concerns. Closing starts in the first conversation that you have with the candidate, and is really, the best strategy. The best closing strategy is one that is somewhat customized and evolves with each candidate. You're going to want to tailor how you're pitching your opportunity based on this individual's motivations and the concerns that they have when considering your opportunity. You should be very inquisitive about these things, not just once you've decided to make an offer, but all throughout the entire process. Things such as how they feel about your company and culture, how do they feel about the role they're interviewing for, how that compares to what they do today, the seniority of the position versus where they're at now, how compensation fits into this, what is the competitive landscape for this particular candidate too? Do they have competing offers? Are they actively looking to leave the situation they're in, or are they in love with their current gig and you're really trying hard to pull them out of that? All of these things are going to influence how you actually want to present the opportunity. But ideally, none of these things are coming as a surprise to you at the very end of the process. Again, you should be having these conversations all the way throughout and try to get out in front of potential issues. Compensation is obviously a big part. We all work for a reason. And there's certain points in people's lives or certain compensation philosophies that aren't going to work for every single person. If in your first chat with somebody you realize they're working at a FANG company where they have a much higher base salary than what you can offer, I'd be upfront about that. And again, if you see this as something that could be of concern, you'd rather have those conversations earlier in the process as opposed to just learning this after both sides have wasted a bunch of time. So again, as you understand what the concerns are and what the proper motivations are, these are things that you should be adapting and evolving your strategy to throughout the process. The other thing I would say is educate your audience as well. If you find yourself getting the same concerns over and over again from candidates, build materials around it. Again, going back to the talent and pitch materials from earlier, if you're getting the same questions from candidates, there's likely something wrong with how you're presenting it, or there could be a better way of doing it or a more compelling way of doing it. And so taking notes on that throughout the time, and don't be afraid to really change your strategy when you feel like there's a theme happening. Examples of this, we see this a lot with web3 companies of a lot of trying to recruit people from web2 to web3. If you keep finding candidates are asking the same questions, they don't understand how web3 is more than just the cost of Bitcoin or the price of Ethereum. Build a page, build something that expresses what web3 is, what it's all about, and how your product fits into the ecosystem, the overall nature of what we're trying to do. And then lastly, getting to yes. So once the motivations and concerns are well established, it's really time to sell. Emphasize the parts that excite them, and make sure you're talking through their concerns in details and mitigating those where possible. Some of the things that can help with this are setting up proper sell calls and really just showing the love throughout the entire interviewing process. So when it comes to sell calls, these can be a very, very effective tool in terms of actually getting folks across the line at the end. If they've only been hearing the pitch from you over and over again, it might just be helpful to have a second perspective and a fresh lens on it. I think where these can go wrong is where you don't prep the people doing the sell calls very well. If you have somebody, and again, who can do these sell calls? It's other members of the team, it's investors, it's advisors, it's mentors, the same people you're trying to tap into their networks. But basically somebody that you think will represent the company well and speak to this individual candidate. So again, where these don't go well is where you don't prep them. The person just goes in and gives the same sell that they give to every other candidate rather than customizing it to this individual candidate's motivations and concerns. So again, prior to that call, do everything you can do to bring that person fully up to speed on the situation with this particular candidate. Another thing we have here is show them the love. After that you made a decision to move forward with an offer, have everybody on the team that interviewed them send a quick note. Hey, very excited that we're moving forward. Let me know if you have any questions or if you want to set up some time to chat. Just a little note like that, again, can really separate you from other opportunities, other offers they may be considering, and really make you stand out. And also learn what are the concerns and what are the motivations for this person. Candidate gifts and swag is another way of doing this too. After an on-site interview, maybe you're just doing something as simple as giving them one of your stickers, or a crazy branded sock with your company logo on it, or a onesie for their baby. There's a lot of really inexpensive things that you can do here that really do make a difference and kind of give that personal touch and can give some exposure as to what it's like to work for your company and the culture you're trying to build and everything else. An example that came to mind for this is, I don't know if anybody has seen the movie Air, the new Michael Jordan going to Nike movie, but at the time, going back to that, Nike shouldn't have gotten Jordan, right? Like, Nike was not Nike in 1983. Adidas and Converse were the folks that were primarily driving a lot of this traffic and a lot of the attention from the basketball community. Nike really crafted a unique pitch here, where they very much customized it to what MJ wanted. Whereas Converse and Adidas, their pitches were, you can be like Larry Bird, you can be like Magic Johnson and have a shoe with us. MJ wanted to be MJ. He didn't want to be Larry Bird. He didn't want to be Magic Johnson. And so as a result of that, their pitch was extremely custom to him, whereas the other two pitches were very much kind of standardized in what they do for everyone. So I think we all know how the story ended there. Jordan goes to Nike. I think Nike ended up acquiring Converse some years later, so I think they worked out for him. But again, the overall message of the example here is really customizing your pitch to that particular individual. What does this person want? What are they trying to achieve by taking on their next job? What are the things they're looking for in a next role and the things they want to prioritize? And really crafting your pitch around that. I do feel like I need to throw in a caveat here at the end of being mindful to not oversell. You don't want to paint a picture that's not real. You don't want to set up the wrong expectations for a candidate coming in that leads them to being unhappy 3 months after they take the job or 6 months down the road. So again, be reasonable, be realistic about what the state of the world is, but that doesn't mean that you can't sell the things that really matter and help mitigate the concerns that they might have with your opportunity. So in summary, we talked through, again, the 3 different components here, 3 key areas that we think you guys should all be thinking about as you're starting to build your teams. First and foremost, all the pre-work, the things you need to be worried about prior to actually setting out to hire. Investing the time here will make sure you don't waste your time, the team's time, candidates' times down the road, and also ensure that clear, high hiring bar. Then building a pipeline, again, what are some of the external resources you can leverage, and what are the things you need to be thinking about from an organizational perspective as you're starting to craft that pipeline, and then lastly, closing the candidate. Again, this is something that starts all the way back in the defining your needs section. What is your talent brand? How are you treating candidates? How are you working your pitch into every single part of this process? So that's all we have. Happy to open up to questions.
One thing you guys brought up was documenting processes. How do you do that? What are you documenting? Like their onboarding code? Like what does that mean to document like the onboarding flow? Or document processes. What does that look like?
So I think there's different stages that you're probably going to be doing this. At the earliest stage, using G Suite, keep it simple, like either Google Docs or Google Sheets, but try to track as many things as possible and be as organized as you can. It could be as simple as one sheet that's your whole interview process from the beginning, like creating your hiring plan, thinking through the focus areas, and being able to share that with each person that's going to be interviewing. And then on the other end of like your Google Sheet would be like your interview feedback and all the tracking of that. Like I've talked to this candidate, here's our scorecard for each one, summarizing all of it. It's important to do at the earliest stage because one, this does set the foundation for future upgrades that you're going to do as you begin to scale your org. But even from like candidate experience and reputationally, like you talk to a candidate like in your first year, 4 years later, you're too early for them, you talk to them again 4 years later, you don't remember that you talked to them, like those little things will go a long way in helping you bring that person in. But if you have that in your records and you can reference that, it'll help you a lot. And on the opposite end, you may have had like the worst candidate ever in your first year. You forget about it, 5 years later, that candidate comes back around, reapplies, you completely don't remember, they join and you're like, oh my God, this was that same person, super toxic, I should have never brought them on. If you don't keep records and you don't have these processes in place and all that data, you could make a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, write things down. It's one of the, you'll have a lot of post-interview conversations where you think everybody's on the same page leaving it, but the key takeaways, you need to make sure that you write them down, which will help you scale that hiring process as well, right? Like as you onboard new team members, you don't want to have to go through the full-on interview training and calibration every single time somebody new joins your team. So being, again, diligent about writing these things down and editing them as you go too. Like you guys should reevaluate your hiring processes frequently, every month, every 2 months, like just to make sure there's no major gaps in any one part of the funnel. If you're seeing really, really low conversion, and we can help you guys with what standard conversion rates are at technical phone screen to onsite to offer, like what things you should be striving for here. But the overall kind of message here is like you just want to be mindful of where are potential breaks within our funnel, what are things that we need to try to optimize for, and if you're not tracking these things, if you're not really organized about it, it's just going to be finger in the wind, like how does it feel today? But yeah.
One thing with working remote is you always try to, you assume that people are on the same page oftentimes in terms of what we're building towards, who we're building for. And when I think about like documenting processes, I try to think about how can we consistently remind people like why we're here, why are we on Slack right now, like why are you shipping this feature? How do you recommend sort of like documenting that process and reiterating that stuff? So for example, for crypto, I used to work in restaurants, and the boss would always plaster the mission. When we enter the kitchen, when we leave the kitchen, it'd be on the walls. Like he'd always remind us like why we're doing this, why we're here. It'd be like these subliminal things. I'm trying to think, how can I incorporate more of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a good way to do this is to really tie it to your cultural values. And again, we've talked so much about the importance of really having that culture be prevalent and something you're talking about all the time. You can build that into interview processes. I've seen companies, as part of their scorecards, they'll make sure that they tie cultural cultural missions or things that they're trying to achieve within the scorecards, and actually set up the feedback framework based around these types of things. Now, depending on what your values are, it may or may not be possible to do that, but I think where you can weave in kind of the overall vision into your internal hiring team, it keeps people aligned on what it is that you're trying to build and why you need to hire these people. So I think that's the other thing that, as you're starting to scale the organization, a lot of folks won't be able to see around corners in the way that you guys will as founders. They might be asking themselves, why are we even doing this? Why do we need this person? And it really is your job as the founder to make sure people are aligned on this, and that you're keeping them aligned for what the vision is and where you guys are trying to go with everyone that you're interviewing. So I would also encourage you to really advocate for recruiting within your organization. I've seen founders tell their founding teams, you guys are founders first and engineers second, or I'm sorry, recruiters first and engineers second, or whatever. Like, you just want to have this culture where people are excited to recruit and they're excited to help scale the company. You don't want to have a situation where it's 10 minutes before their interview and they're like, oh, I got to go do this for an hour. This is a waste of time. I have to stop coding. I have to break my context switch. All of these things. Like, they should know that that's as important as the code they're writing because of what you guys are trying to achieve by hiring these people.
Last thing, promise. How do we, during the interview process, communicate that this is more than just like a 9 to 5, and do it in a very like empathetic but very, I guess, diplomatic, aggressive manner? Yeah.
I tie it back to, again, like the cultural, like what are you putting out there externally? I think the way that you describe your culture, I don't know if you want to go as far as saying this can be the hardest job you ever had and this is a sweatshop, it's a tough place to work, but you can also say things along the lines of, we're really trying to, we're aggressively trying to build, or we have people who are really, really passionate about what we're building. There's different ways to kind of describe that environment without bluntly stating, like, we want you to be online all the time. Right. But I think that's something you also should be assessing for throughout the interview process. Again, that cultural fit. Is this person more of the missionary versus the mercenary? Are they more concerned with themselves and what they're doing versus the mission of the company and what we're all trying to achieve? When everyone's unified behind a vision, they're not counting the hours on how long have I worked today, and just trying to get off of work for that particular day or that particular week. They're focused on the problem they're trying to solve, and that makes time go by so much quicker, and also takes a lot of the emotion and some of those other things that can get people kind of upset while they're working for you. Cool. Anything to add, Mehdi?
We did this actually at Chainlink Labs. It was really important, the company I was at prior to coming here, and just being very genuine and intentional on the why behind that. I think that will come across, like, why are you actually having everybody operate in this way? And for the founder there, Sergey, he was very, very driven to be successful. Like, it was really clear, like, he was personally passionate behind it, so people rallied behind that. Just knowing that he wasn't just saying these things for the sake of saying it, but he actually lived it out. And he would clearly explain this. Like, we would do quarterly hiring manager trainings of going through the key operating principles that were really important to the values there. So now you have all the managers who understand it, they breathe it. We talked through real examples on a quarterly basis of people that embodied these values. So you actually saw, like, these were things that were important. They weren't just posters on the wall that you walk by and no one can recall them and remember them, but these were embedded into the DNA of the company, and it showed in how they were delivering on a regular basis by tying it back to, here's why we're winning, because we do this, this, and this, and we stay disciplined on it.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, guys. Really awesome talk. Wanted to ask if either or both of you have any examples of kind of going above and beyond to tailoring, closing a candidate around things that you learned about them in the process.
I can think of one example from when I was at Uber. And again, this kind of goes back to understanding a particular candidate's personal situation, what are their concerns, and also what gets them excited. And the story that comes to mind here is there was a candidate we were trying to interview. I think he was working at a startup that had been acquired by LinkedIn. He was very much a startup guy that didn't want to work at LinkedIn. We were really trying to sell him on the vision of we were still building Uber, even though there's a couple thousand people here. Like, it is still a startup. We are still trying to build. And this person was just a really, really strong cultural fit. I mean, they checked all the boxes for us, but they had a lot of concerns. I mean, there was some press happenings at Uber. There's a lot of concerns that people had at that particular time. And we really wanted to make this person, again, feel the love and kind of see what it's like with the people that we have, and less about what you read in the tabloids. And For this particular individual, we found out he was a big skateboarder, and I don't know how common that is within our community. There was nobody else on our team that was also a big skateboarder, but we did a little bit of research into this, and found a shop that made very high-end skateboards. We basically got one for him that had Uber branding all over it. And then our head of engineering actually drove to this individual's house, gave them this gift. The guy signed the offer the next day. And I think this candidate had 6 or 7 competing offers. No one else did anything like that, right? And so I think we were very much, it was between us and 2 or 3 other companies at the time, but that extra level of going above and beyond, doing something very custom, physical, tangible, was a major difference for him. It was something that he referenced after he joined, that if it weren't for this, I wouldn't be here. And it was something so basic, it's just giving them a skateboard. But again, just those little things can mean a lot for some people.
Yeah, another example that I have is here at A16Z, we had an exec hired that we were trying to help a portfolio company land, and we knew that this person was really impressed by the general partner behind it. And so not just having the general partner jump on the call and sell them, but prepping on the little detail that went a long way for this person that we knew and gathered from the portfolio company to have them focus and jump in on their personal experience of those concerns that the individual had. And so again, to what Craig was saying earlier in the presentation on closing strategy, really being thoughtful through the interview process and taking notes of the things that are important and documenting those things can be the biggest difference between one company landing someone versus the other. To the Nike Air example, they really honed in on these are the things that are top of mind. When you come at the end of the process weeks later and wow, that person remembered, they actually care about me and why I'm joining here versus just being another candidate, I think those are the things that can really win someone over.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Anything else? Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Craig and Mehdi. That was great.